I'm Benjamin Hall, and I'm searching for heroes. Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. And today we have another guest who clearly just spends every single day trying to think of ways to help other people. And he has done so his whole career. Now, he is retired Lieutenant Colonel Jim Lorraine, and he served as a nurse in the Special Operations Command and served in a number of different countries. But he has then gone on to set up the American Warrior Partnership, and that is to go out and help veterans who are struggling to get back into normal life, particularly those who are struggling from suicide. But he has some really fascinating ideas, new ideas about how you can try and identify people in advance if they may be heading in that direction, but also talks about in what different ways you can start to help, and his own experiences with both PTSD and TBI. On top of that, he's also a caregiver for his wife who has epilepsy and breast cancer as well. So he is someone who's just out there doing his best, and he explains to us today why and how he does that. Anyway, thanks so much for joining us. Jim, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a great pleasure to see you.
Well, you too. I'm glad we can get together.
Yeah, and this is a story that we keep coming back to, we keep talking about, and I think that people keep forgetting how many people who serve our country, who go out there, spend their whole lives in the military, come home again, and are perhaps, they have difficulty fitting in, but perhaps they are also forgotten by many people. Would you agree that, veterans who come back are forgotten by many Americans?
Well, I would. I think that the percentage of veterans in the United States relative to the population is almost now about 6.2%. So it's really small. Used to be close to, when I can remember when I started this 20 years ago, the percentage of veterans was almost 18%. And so now it's 6.7%, 6.2% this year. And it's shrinking because the Vietnam era is shrinking, honestly, as fast as the World War II folks went. So it's easy to get lost. I think that there's some veterans who come back and they just say, I don't want to have anything to do with my military service and I'm going to move on, because there is a little bit of a stigma. When I worked in the Pentagon back in 2008, 2009, there was a large effort to destigmatize post-traumatic stress, and we made it something you could talk about and something that was not stigmatizing.
So do you mean that people wanted to break with their military service because they didn't want to deal with many of the feelings or the bad things that they had, and they wanted to leave that chapter behind?
No, I think that they see that there's a stigma to military service.
Gosh, I mean, talking to someone, who on Fox and what we do and talking about that amazes me. There's a stigma to it. We believe in holding up high people who have served. But
yeah, but everyone thinks, so when you go to an employer, so we find this when we work with employers, the veterans aren't self-disclosing that they served in the military because there's a stigma around post-traumatic stress. And everyone thinks that every single veteran has post-traumatic stress, when the point is that they don't. And so, I don't see it. When you see veterans start to be really recognized is when, like, they use their GI Bill. They'll come forward and say, hey, I need to go to school. Here's my GI Bill. And what we see at the schools is that they somewhat, blend back into the crowd. They receive their benefit. They blend into the crowd. They aren't necessarily out there wearing camouflage, et cetera. My son he currently serves today. And a lot of his buddies that I've helped with transition, they don't wear military. You would never know that there was a military affiliation in their life because they just say, I don't need to be recognized as having served in the military. The other piece is that thank you for your service has been so overused that a lot of us are like, we're more than everybody that I know that has thank you for your service. I said, what do you say? And they say, I'd go back in a second. Go back in a second. I miss not being part of it. I'd go back in a second. I'm now a civilian. It's a different thing. I'm moving on.
Do you think that there is a growing problem then within society in general? Like why an employer would not want to hire someone who has served? Like why is that move happening in society? It's a big question, I know, but like why is that move happening?
Well, think about it. Veterans take their life at almost twice the rate of non-veterans. Everyone hears about post-traumatic stress. We, as a national veteran serving nonprofit, I get a lot of people that come to me and they say, hey, we'd like your opinion on this movie, or can we host this movie? Every single one says, the theme of it is veteran overcomes post-traumatic stress to try to get on with his life. Right? And you look at it and you go, the message that's being conveyed to the American people is these people the veterans are broken. Now, what we see, we do America's Warrior Partnership does a national survey. And we survey at the local community level and we survey nationally. And what we see is about 10 to 15% of veterans are struggling to get resources to improve their quality of life. And then the other 80 to 85%, they're doing okay. They're like moving forward. Hey, I got my job. I got my family. I'm taking the kids to soccer. I'm busy. I'm not going to go to an American Legion or VFW because I don't have the time in my evening to go. And that's not my vibe. I'm trying to get on with my life. I'm the older end of a post 9/11 veteran. I'm 62. And I served up until 2005. But I mean, for the vast majority of post 9/11 veterans, they're almost, 10 to 20 years younger than me. They have a life. They're moving on.
Yeah.
And they stay close to their, my experience is that they stay close to their buddies that they served with. But in terms of other veterans who are out there, unless that's where they're finding it. It's just,
I suppose it creates this sort of terrible circle whereby people who leave the military, as you say, are not getting the opportunities they deserve. They're not getting jobs. And as a result, they then struggle to pay their bills. They struggle to get homes. And then you have this cyclical thing where actually, if they came out and they had all the support they needed, then the figures for perhaps suicide would be a lot lower. The figures for PTSD might be a lot lower. And so you create this terrible cycle where now what we talk about is so many American veterans are committing suicide. But that's only true because maybe community isn't welcoming them in, or isn't giving them the opportunity they need.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that America's Warrior Partnership, one of the slogans that we have is, if you know a vet, tell a vet. So what we're trying to do is to tell the American people, if you know a veteran, tell a veteran about America's Warrior Partnership. If they need help, we can help. I was on a call yesterday with the VA, and when they were talking about suicide prevention, and they've really over the last, I'd say over the last 14 years have really taken homelessness and dropped it. It's gone up a little bit, but they've done a pretty good job of it. And we were part of that. We are part of that. But they put up a slide, and there's 20 homeless veteran programs within the VA, 20 of them. And I said, and Mike, I chimed in and I said, who coordinates amongst these?
Yeah.
Some are in the Veterans Benefit Administration, some of it's Veterans Healthcare.
But are they providing exactly the same sort of role?
Yeah, there's a lot of duplication, but they're all separate programs run by individuals and their teams, and they're doing they've got their lane and they're sticking to it. What America's Warrior Partnership is about is how do I take a veteran who is absolutely confused with where to go and what to do and how to access services, and then making sense out of the 20 and saying, how do we navigate the complexity of not only the government services, but the complexity of the nonprofit services. So, but to get back to your point of what's affecting the American veteran today, I think that the vast majority of American veterans have served their nation well, and they're getting on with their life, and they're productive citizens where they live. They'll participate and they'll stand for the flag, and they'll make sure that everybody takes their hat off when it's time to say, when you hear the national anthem. But they're getting on with their life, and they're doing really well. The narrative is they're doing well. There are a number of veterans who need help, but that story is leading more than the story of, hey, the vast majority are leading their nation. And again, to go back to the 2009, there was a big stigma to accessing mental health and behavioral health services and other services that could mitigate the impact of post-traumatic stress. Big stigma. So we messaged it that it was okay to seek services, and that if you're in the military, you should go. Well, the American people heard everybody in the military is struggling with post-traumatic stress. And so we should be cautious, because they're a population, they're an employee, they're a friend, they're a neighbor who you should look at them and just keep your eye on them, because, they probably have that post-traumatic stress when they don't.
And I suppose that the message that even say us in the media, when we tell stories like, about, veterans who are struggling, is to say the vast majority are not, but it is our responsibility to make sure that every single one is getting through. So
Yes.
just to be clear, to make that distinction, we are going out because every single one should not be left behind, because they are veterans. And so make that clear distinction, that look at the success so many others go on.
We look at it as America's Warrior Partnership in the fact that, 90% of community-based services are focused on the 10% that are struggling.
Mm-hmm.
What about the other 90% of the veterans who are doing well? Who touches them? And how do you take them? How do you help them move through? I have a couple of buddies of mine who are highly functional, highly successful in their fields. And they came to me and they said, we're just having, and they each come from a different military background. And they said, hey, we need some help. They said, we think things aren't connecting. As we're getting older, it seems like it's getting worse. And I was like, yeah, wait till you get my age. But I talked to him a little bit, and I connected him to a program that helps him with traumatic brain injury. And it's a very high level, and it's for people that have mild to moderate TBI. And I tell you what, I've got feedback. I got a text this morning from one of the guys who went through the program, and he said, I feel like I have a new sense of purpose and a new sense of self. The point is that they're people, by the way, neither of them carry their military service as a badge with them. You would never know it to talk to them. But the point is that they had no idea where to go. They knew something was off, and they came to America's Warrior Partnership. We connected them to a service. They got their service. They're feeling better, and I'm proud of them.
Well, I suppose I understand that well, because I was injured in Ukraine, and I had prosthetic legs, etc. But I had a traumatic brain injury, and I remember at first I was a journalist and I wanted to get back to work, and I had trouble getting back and recalling certain things. And so I was lucky to have support that said, you need to go and speak to someone, talk about this, and come up with systems to remember things. So before you go into somewhere, have a total list, figure out what you're doing, have it really planned out. And it's quite a simple thing to suggest, but I hadn't really got there myself.
Yeah.
And I was given that direction. And today I'm back, obviously doing my job as I ever was before, thanks to that help. And I work in a different way to the way I used to, but it's because of the support that people like you are giving that I'm able to do that.
So for us, what we do and what I've always done is I'm not necessarily providing the service. I just know the best in class that do. And we have a great relationship with them. On the other hand, our real job and our tough job is getting to know the veterans who are in the country who don't know where to go, and telling them the one phone call that they can make, the one place that they can reach out to, no matter when they served or what their status is America's Warrior Partnership. And they can go to our website, they can say, hey, I need help, and it'll come to us. And then what we'll do is make sense of the madness, figure out what's going on in their life, who do they need to go to based on where they are in their process, and get them connected to partners who we know have a great track record of doing great stuff.
More of our conversation right after this. Sort of talking about veterans who do have PTSD, I suppose important message is that even with PTSD, though, you can still get through that. You can still improve it. Am I right in saying that you had PTSD to a certain degree? And so
I did.
Can you tell us about your part?
Because it was cool.
Because but it's fascinating because you've had to deal with what you are helping other people go through. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your own experiences.
Yeah. So a couple of things. You talked about having a TBI, and I had a TBI from combat, but it was literally, I was standing in Somalia. I was in Mogadishu, and if you know Mogadishu, it sits on the Indian Ocean. It's windy.
I've been a few times. Yeah.
Okay, so it's windy all the time. Never stops blowing, and the sand's blowing. And I was standing by a door. I was standing outside of a door, and somebody opened up the door on the other end of the tent, and it blew the door that I was standing next to dead open, knocked me out for about 20 minutes. And knocked me cold. I had my head down because I was literally grabbing my pack, and the door hit me in the head and knocked me out. And they said, "Oh, you've got a head injury," and I had a headache for probably 2 weeks, and I just let it go. I didn't think about it. So that happened, and then anyways, so my post-traumatic stress, and we didn't even call it that at that time. I spent time in Mogadishu. I showed up when the humanitarian was there, and I stayed through a good period of time. Seeing people starving to death isn't a pretty picture. And then moving from there into Task Force Ranger, and what was happening at that time wasn't the same. And I, at the time, I was a nurse in the Air Force, and I wasn't trained. I came home and I said, my son, I think was like 4 years old, 3 or 4 years old. And he said, he felt like I wasn't the same. My wife felt like I wasn't the same. I didn't feel like I was the same. And that went on. And it wasn't until I had, was just about to get out of the military that I realized I had, just before my last deployment, and now I was in special operations, and I was much more prepared. Just before I had gotten a treatment at the University of South Florida, and I felt like it reset. Now my family didn't feel like it. They said you changed.
When you said reset, what do you mean?
I was less angry. I was less reactive. I was less I couldn't go to a firework thing. I couldn't hear loud noises. If you came up behind me and startled me, that was not the thing to do.
What was the program that helped you reset? Like what did you go through? How did they help?
Yeah, it was called EMDR. And it was so I went through that, and in part of EMDR is you sort of you create a picture and you create a story in your mind, and that is counter to what. You have these experiences, and then you relive them in your mind, and they do some other therapy around it. But I mean, the point is that even now I can't remember some of the things that happened because part of it was resetting. That's what I meant. It was a reset, and I changed, and everyone that was around me said, "Wow, you're less reactive." And my son was ecstatic because we could have fireworks, and I wasn't reactive like driving in a car. And then I had a couple of deployments. My last deployment ended in 2005 in Iraq, and I came home, and that was a tough deployment. And I knew at the time, I knew what it felt like before, and I knew what was happening. And I immediately went in. I went back. I was in Tampa. I went back to USF, and I said, I think I need to have another treatment. They did it. It was very helpful. The other thing that was with it was it didn't involve any medicine. I'm not a person who I'm not saying it's a negative thing, but I'm just not somebody who takes medicine. And
I would agree. I would agree with you.
yeah, and so it was. The other thing is, I had a high level security clearance that was working at United States Special Operations Command. I had all these things, and then I got out, and I think I have to tell you, I feel like it was so long of a period. I'm looking at it now. I'm about 30 years post Somalia,
Yeah.
and it's been so long of a period. I can't remember what I was like before.
Yeah. Wow. It's interesting because you said there that when you came back from Iraq in '05, you recognized the symptoms coming on. I think that's key. And I wonder if.
Yeah, I lost my sense of humor. My son was now much older.
Yeah.
And he said, "You used to laugh about things," and all of a sudden that's the thing that went bam, holy cow! You're right. I'm not even happy.
Do you think that maybe quite a few of the people who come through AWP as well, who need that help, just are not aware they even have PTSD? Is that an issue? And so maybe they don't really know that they could just go and take one of these, reach out to someone, but perhaps they're just not aware.
Yeah, I think. Now if I was to do it, so I don't think that they're aware, but I've got to tell you, there's a program called Boulder Crest Foundation that runs that takes an approach on post-traumatic stress and other things that's called a post-traumatic growth. Have you ever heard of post-traumatic growth?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so Ken Falk is a great friend of mine. He and Josh Goldberg founded a program. I wish that was there when I came back in 94. I wish
Will you explain it? Explain it just for our listeners.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a treatment, it's a training. And the training is, to sum it up, to make it really short, is basically the sum of your experiences, while they're no one should ever go through them, actually make you a better person. And let's work through this and look and see how it goes. But it also reflects on what was it like growing up? What was it like during your military service? What was your like during your event? Tell us about it. Express what bring it out and express what you have. I haven't gone through the program. I have teammates of mine that are like, you should go. But the point is that the gist of it is post-traumatic growth. You go through these experiences, and the sum of your experiences make you a better person, make you stronger, make you it's not a disability. It's really you have these things piled on you in life, and you've survived through them. How did that make you a better person? How did that make you better? And then you sort of reflect on it. But yeah, I wish I had gone through it then. I would have taken a perspective of what I experienced much differently than I did. And to your point about the symptoms, the symptoms between a traumatic brain injury and PTS are very similar. There's a lot of overlap. And I'll give you an example of a young kid that I helped here in Augusta, Georgia. I had met him. He was really struggling. He was a National Guardsman who was a route clearance. They were the guys who were driving down the route and blowing the IEDs, right? And had multiple blasts underneath them that, the vehicle absorbed the blast, but the overpressurization would go through. Then he had another vehicle that had missed, and a buddy of his was killed in the event. Anyways, the point is that this kid was being treated for post-traumatic stress in the local VA, and he was going to mental health, and they were saying, this is just not adding up. You're not making any progress. And they would tell him, you need to do A, B, C, D, and E. And then I would talk to him, and he couldn't remember like A and B. He would barely get to C. And then what I did was I sent him to a friend who did assessments for kids in high school. I said, can you do a cognitive assessment for him and an intellectual assessment for him? He tested at the second grade. This kid was a smart kid going out of high school when he went in the military, but he was functioning at a second grade level. And we were treating him as if he was a high school graduate. He was a staff sergeant. we were treating him like this. So what we did was we sent him to have evaluation on traumatic brain injury out at the Shepherd Share Center out in Atlanta, Georgia, and he went through that treatment for a traumatic brain injury, came home, went to the VA. They said, I need you to do A, B, C, D, and E. Now he could cognitively assess. He could understand it. And he could say, okay, I'll do this. I'll do all the steps. The point is that he had a TBI that was masking his PTS, but everybody was treating his PTS because it's what everybody did, when in actuality, you should have treated their cognitive ability first and then moved to the post-traumatic second, because it takes cognitive understanding to process PTS. Does it make sense?
Yeah. How interesting. I wonder is there a line at which, are there some people who might have a TBI or PTSD or who don't have it, so the other way around, who don't have it, but think they do have it, and maybe want to sort of, it becomes an identity to them in a sense. Like, do you see it working in that way as well?
Yeah. One of the things...
Because it's thrown around, as you were saying at the beginning, we were saying, so often they just talk about PTSD, and I just wonder if some people maybe they latch onto it.
We've incentivized it too. You get a 50% disability rating from the VA if you have post-traumatic stress, anywhere from 30 to 50%, and it's almost a guarantee. And so it's a perverse incentive to having a disability. And a good friend of mine, Dan Gade, wrote a book about, hey, what are we doing on these disability benefits? And
that's so interesting. So there must be countless people who would do it just to get the benefits. I mean,
are they deserving? Have they been exposed? Have they experienced things in their life that may contribute to it? Yeah. Is it to the point where I can't work? I need 100% disability so that because I can't work and I can't, I don't think so. I think, one of the, this is going to be a generalized statement, but I've said one of the biggest killers of veterans is lack of purpose, and I'm a big believer, I'm, again, 62 years old, retired from the military, and I'm still working. I'm working because I love the people I do, and I have a passion for doing it, and it's purpose. I have a purpose. Yeah. I have friends who are just hard retired, and I go to them and I go, "What are you doing? Why are come on, let's get up and get out and get involved in your community and be involved in things." And I
just think it's sort of, it has to be paying back. Like, if you want to create something for the next generation, for your own children, once you've retired, we should all, no matter how small it is, we should all be going, I don't know, if just helping one person, trying to do one good thing, trying to make, that perhaps is also something that is missing in society. Lots of people that I know from my parents' generations, I look at them as well, and I think, what are you? You're not giving back. You're not helping. Off you go. And I wonder if that's a problem as well. Like, have we reached a place where not enough people are chipping in and helping others?
I don't know. I think that there is. I think that the fact, when you see people walk by people that need help, or when you see the videos of somebody getting their daylights beat out of them on the street, and then you see there's 15 people just standing by, not doing anything, but doing this, and you go, this is going to do nothing. The person's going to,
and I think listeners, you're holding up your phone. You're just saying,
I'm holding up my phone. Sorry.
Just filming, doing nothing but filming. Yeah.
And you're just filming. You're become an observer. And I always say, America's Warrior Partnership, one of the things that sets us apart from others is that we're biased towards action. And my personality is I'm biased towards action. I am not a person who sits around and watches while somebody gets the daylights beat out of them. I'm the one who will go run to the gunfire. I'm gonna help somebody if they need help. I'm the person who, it drives me nuts when you see flags flying on cars, like they post them, U.S. flags, and they post them on their windshield, and then they blow off. Well, I'm the guy who stops in the middle of the road to go pick up the American flag so it's not sitting in the road. Anyways, the point is that if our nation had more people in general who would step up and help the person to the right or to their left, that would be great. And I think veterans are that. If they, they just have to get up and get out and get involved in what they're doing. And again, one of the things that we do as America's Warrior Partnership, and we're trying to encourage veterans to do, is if you know a veteran and you don't know how to take care of them at all, refer them to America's Warrior Partnership. We'll help them. But so if you know a vet, tell a vet. And the point is that, we have a suicide study at America's Warrior Partnership. It's a premature death study because we look also at not only suicide, but overdose. And one of the things that we do note is that the veterans who are more isolated are at higher risk for taking their own life. The ones who feel like everybody's forgotten them, that they're all alone, that they have no hope for a future. Hope is a powerful drug. And if you can increase the hope amongst veterans, you'll reduce.
You mentioned overdoses there, and can you just weigh out the numbers? Like how many, and is it included in the suicide number? Like what is the number for overdoses versus what is the number for suicide?
Yeah, so it's really tough. So this overdose is part of suicide. So what happens is someone dies, and let's say they die of an overdose. The coroner or medical examiner in that county makes the determination whether it was a suicide, homicide, accident, undetermined, or a natural cause of death. 5 things. There's literature out there that say coroners and medical examiners 60% of the time or so will classify an overdose death as accident or undetermined when it's clearly suicide, mainly because of the stigma, the financial implications on a family, et cetera, or they know the family. In the rural area, that's far more because the coroners and medical examiners know who, by large, what the literature says is they know who the families are. Our point there is, my point, is that we looked at overdose deaths, we looked at suicides, and our research is showing that there's an undercounting of veterans. Of those who served. So, like as an example, in the VA research and study, they don't count National Guard and Reserve, because it's fuzzy whether they fit the criteria of being a veteran, which is served on active duty or had 180 days of continuous orders, whether they're in the Guard and Reserve. So they just don't count them. So that's suicide. Then what we started to do is look at overdoses, and overdoses by like heroin, fentanyl, opioids, and other drugs, non-prescribed drugs that are considered self-harm behavior. And, what we found was it was almost as many as suicide. It was enormous. And so what we've said at America's Warrior Partnership is if we're gonna address this, why are we just focused on suicide? I know that's the catchword for everyone, suicide. But if we're not the bystander on the street with a phone while somebody's getting their head beat in by a crowd, why are we not focused on prevention? Like if I can prevent an overdose, why is that not as important as somebody who is classified as a suicide? It's preventable. I can stop it. I can do things to keep that overdose from going. But, for us, when we look at it, we think that the number is almost the number of overdoses amongst that are preventable. That's, and I'm not talking about somebody who accidentally overdoses on insulin or accidentally overdoses on a blood thinner. I'm talking about somebody who intentionally has heroin, meth, etc.
So talk to me about how you AWP would. I mean, how would you prevent that? What is your main goal? How do you really try and go and help prevent that?
Yeah, our goal and the goal of the study is called Operation Deep Dive. The goal of the study is to identify, to characterize the veteran who's at greatest risk for taking their life based on where they live. And so it's really looking at a community and saying, in the northwestern side of the city, you have a really high concentration of suicides that are happening. And the people that are taking their life, those veterans, have a military history that looks like this. Now go find the military history that look like this in that community before they even think about taking their life, because that's where they're going to do it.
Do you go and identify potential people who may need direction and go and knock on their door and approach them?
That's where we want to go. Right now, we're in the midst of the study. But what the study is indicating, and by the end of probably the end of the September, early October, I'll have for you. I'm happy to come back and talk to you about what the findings are for Massachusetts. But we're going to have that by Massachusetts. Like, where in Massachusetts would the state need to focus, or the community need to focus, to reduce their suicide rate? And
would you say it is largely low-income areas? What are you seeing at the moment that
what areas? We saw was suicide was more prevalent within the urban areas. Overdose was more prevalent within the rural areas. It wasn't necessarily by socioeconomic status. We weren't looking. That wasn't something that popped out in terms of where the hotspots were, and it differed. So what, as an example, we looked at Florida. The veteran who's taking their life in Miami looks different than Tampa. Looks different than Jacksonville. Looks different than the Panhandle, and it looks different than the rural areas between all of them. And so our point was having a single suicide strategy that was a national suicide strategy, and that the states would adopt and try to make it as their suicide strategy, wasn't precise enough to have an impact.
But maybe that's why the VA has 20 different suicide.
Well, the 20 different are the homelessness programs. But
I'm sorry. Go like
yeah. No, but what you do see amongst the suicide strategies is, at any given time, I would laugh about it's not a joking matter, but I would look at the criteria, and at some time in my life, I was at a high risk. And now I never have been. I've never been somebody who's been suicidal. It's not me. But I would be a target. My point was, why don't we know the military history? So what we do in Operation Deep Dive is, I'll give you an example. The state of Massachusetts provides us with all the deaths of everybody who died in the last 10 years in the state. And then what we do is we send to the Department of Defense Manpower Data Center, we send all the names and social security numbers of everybody who died. And what we ask is, send us back their military history. So we have the military history of everybody in Massachusetts who died in the last 10 years. Whether it's from heart disease, or whether it's from cancer, or whether it's from suicide, or whether it's from overdose. That's classified as accident undetermined. And I know where they died, I know their military history, and I know who they are.
And then you probably look for ages as well, if it's a younger age group.
Yeah, but the military is different, right? So what we look at is, we do look at age, but we look at how long did they serve, and how long has it been since they were discharged. So just think of it. I have an 18-year-old that comes in as a private. I could also have a 28-year-old that comes in as a private. Mm-hmm. Now they go through this. Let's say they go through 3 or 4 years of military history, and they both get out. They're essentially, military-wise, their military affiliation is very similar, but their age is 10 years apart. Now, is it an age thing, or is it a time of length of service and time since discharge thing? And so what we look at is, how long did they serve and how long have they been out? One of the things that's, the narrative that we're looking at is, the first year post-discharge is the worst time, is the highest suicide rate. And we're not seeing that. We've got more work to do, but that's not leading us to that. One of the
how many years would you say tends to be the most likely? Is it 5? Is it 10? Is it quite a long time?
There's a couple of bumps. There's a bump at 5 years, and there's a bump about 10 years post-service. Again, the reason why you talk about post-service is it doesn't have anything to do with their age. It has to do with what happens post-service at about that time. And we have more work to do on that. But the point is about Operation Deep Dive, and the work that we're doing and where we're heading is to create a product from this research that we can provide to cities, states, counties, the nation, and say, if you want to reduce your suicide rate by 25%, here's the people that you need to go find.
Yeah.
I as I said, I came out of the special operations community, and the way I term it is we need to go from fishing for those who are going to take their lives, which we're currently doing. We're casting this broad net and pulling it in and hoping that we get the person that's at risk.
Yeah.
Need to move from fishing for those who are going to take their lives to hunting for those who are going to take their lives.
Yeah.
Who is the person? How do I find them and how do I engage them before they even think about it?
What do you see, like, how would you say the relationship is then between sort of the military, how they would deal with this, and how, say, the civilians or you are dealing with this? Do you think that the military system, the military are doing enough to help? Or do you think, because if they were, presumably, you know, AWP and groups like yours would not need to be set up. So you must say that more needs to be done by the military themselves.
Do you include the VA and the Department of Defense? Or?
Yes. Let's say yes to the VA.
Yeah. So the Department of Defense, you know, their mission is to fight and win wars, and that's their mission, and they're doing, I think, the best that they can do in terms of transition. There's a lot of hands in the pot on the transition piece of military. I think it could be cleaner transition, more coordinated. But on the VA side, I think the VA is the second largest budget in the government. The VA's budget is second only to the Department of Defense. It's even higher than Health and Human Services. I think there's a lot of programs that are available, but the VA only serves, I don't know if you knew this, we've got 17.6 million veterans in the United States. The VA serves 9 million. There's another 8 million out there that don't even touch the VA. They don't touch the VA. They're not part of the VA. They're not associated with the VA. And oh, by the way, that number,
such a large number,
doesn't include National Guard and Reserve.
Wow. Is that because it's so, and I've heard it can be very complicated to know which department to go into the VA. So it can be complicated. That's it's always just because they don't feel they need any help, or that they don't know that help is there, or they don't know.
I'm a big advocate for the VA. I think every veteran who served, if you're eligible, you should enroll. You've earned the right to have choices, right? Life is about, you make decisions so you have choices later on. You signed up, you raised your hand to swear to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. If you're eligible for the VA, enroll with the VA. But the important piece of that is that there's a misconception that it's really hard to get enrolled with the VA. It's very easy to do. The misconception is, if I do, so this goes back to the post-traumatic stress. There's a lot of veterans who feel like, if I go to the VA and I have post-traumatic stress, they'll take my weapons. And that's not necessarily the case. You know, if you're a threat to yourself and others, then yes, that's a possibility, but that's still a possibility in the civilian world. The point is that go get enrolled with the VA, go get your health care. If you have trouble navigating it, contact America's Warrior Partnership. If you want to know how to get enrolled, contact America's Warrior Partnership. It's easy. I have to tell you, it's easy. This morning I enrolled a buddy of mine who sadly is he's not doing really well. He's got cancer, and he never enrolled with the VA. And it's been 10 years. It drives me nuts.
Well, yeah, I mean,
never enrolled with the VA.
More people should definitely reach out to the VA or to AWP as well.
We'll help navigate this complex system. And totally. The one thing you talked about my wife in the beginning. My wife is a vet, combat vet. My wife is a badass. She was in the third class of women to go through jump school at Fort Benning. And then she went on as a specialist, and I think she was the first woman to sign to 7th Special Forces Group she was an intelligence analyst. And then she left and got out, had a family, and then used her GI Bill to get her nursing degree. She's a nurse practitioner. During that time, she joined the Air Force and retired as a colonel. But anyways, my wife,
Becky, her name is Becky. So
my wife's name is Becky. So my wife, she goes through this process, and this is why it's important. She's a beneficiary. She's a TRICARE recipient. We live in Augusta, Georgia, near Augusta, so she can go to Fort Eisenhower for her health care. And then she has the VA. And each of the formularies for each of those. Oh, by the way, she's Medicare, so there's four sets of formularies for drugs. She has epilepsy, so she has her choice on where to go to get her drugs. And there was one point at which the VA was the VA's formulary was the least expensive of these expensive anti-epileptic drugs.
Yeah,
she had a choice. She had a choice.
You are a caregiver to her as well, and I know that that's something else which is it was focus on. What is that like? I mean, that's another chapter of your life you presumably didn't see coming, and you have spent a lot of your time now doing that. Yeah,
she was active duty. I was working at SOCOM, running a veteran program for SOCOM, and she had a grand mal seizure, and it ended her career immediately. And she couldn't drive. She kept having other seizures, and it kept getting worse. And I just said, I can't stay working. I have to go take care of her. So we did. We moved back home to near her parents, here in Georgia area, and I took care of her to make sure that she was set. She was pretty independent on her own, but there were some things she just couldn't do. And then once we moved here, she ended up getting a really aggressive form of breast cancer, and went through the surgeries and the chemo and the other pieces of that. And this job allowed me to take care of her when I needed to. It was hard. I've got to tell you that you always need an advocate, and I'm a nurse by trade, so I'm a firm believer in advocacy. And so what ended up happening was I started to be your advocate to the Army, to the Navy, to the Marine Corps, or to the Army and the Air Force. I was astounded that I couldn't get anyone to really help her. I had one group that helped her and that changed her life, which was Wounded Warrior Project. If it wasn't for them, she wouldn't be in the position. They filed her disability claim. They went through the process with her. If it wasn't
this is for the epilepsy or the cancer?
Actually, the epilepsy was the one. The cancer, she hasn't even filed. Anyways, don't get me started. So wow, Wounded Warrior Program was the one that really stepped in. They stepped up. Yeah, they stepped up and said, "Hey, we'll take care of it." I said, I was running a program, and I said, I can't even help her. I don't know how to get through the system. And they said, she qualifies for our program. We'll take care of her. We've got this. And then they took it, and they fought the Department of Defense, and they fought the VA. And to this day, today, she's in. She has the opportunities that she has because of that.
Yeah. So there you go, and that's what AWP can help as well, is to help direct people.
Yeah, and we do. We work back and forth with WWP, but the point is that it takes, everybody has to get involved, and the other slogan that we have is "Together we can do better." At a high level for America's Warrior Partnership is "Together we can do better."
I guess I just want to finish up talking about talking about you briefly, because listening to you talk today, you're someone who really clearly believes in action, in standing up, in helping others. You were a nurse, you served your country, and you set up AWP. All these things really show your commitment to helping others and helping community and what you can do. And I just got to ask, where did that come from? Like, why do you have that when not everybody does?
I think everybody does in their heart. I think for me, I don't know. I was raised that way. I was raised in Central New York. My dad was a World War II vet. All of his brothers. He had 5 brothers. They all went to World War II. They all came home. They all served. My family has served. I'm a nurse. I think when you go to be a nurse and you're trained to be a nurse, you're trained to react and to help people. I've always been a servant. It's probably, one of the things, running a nonprofit, in order for a nonprofit to be successful, you have to have donations, right? And it's the most messed up business model that was ever created in the world is a nonprofit business model. But you have to get donations. And so for me, I'm so servant minded. My team will go, "Oh my gosh, don't send Jim to ask for funding, because he'll give the service away for free, and then because I just want to help. I really just want to help. And then I've got to, I know we're running out of time, but really very quickly, there's a history, there's a background of me that, so growing up, I grew up, I was just getting ready to go in the military. I was trying to get into the Air Force Reserve. And as I was being recruited, I had a terrible accident and I amputated my foot. And I amputated it right at my ankle, right? So right at the ankle there. And I had a great doctor. This is one of those God moments, right? So everything lined up that you could never coordinate in a million years. The right doctor ended up in the right place when I needed help, and the right staff were there, and they reattached my foot back in 1983. And I went through and I had a physical therapist and I had a team, and they said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to be in the Air Force. I want to be in the Air Force." And they said, "There's no way with an amputated foot you're going to be in the Air Force." And I said, "No, I want to be in the Air Force. I'll work as hard as you're going to work, but I need your help." And they helped me, and I went through my physical training. I've never missed a run. I never missed a PT test. I never failed a PT test. And it's all because of the people who cared enough back when that happened to make it so that I could get to where I am today. So it's almost like it's a payback. And
I totally feel you. The people, and I was down at the Brook Army Medical Center being treated, and I was there for 7 months, and those guys
Center for the Intrepid, right?
Exactly. And those guys, they're the ones that really, they just said, whatever we want to do, we're going to go do it. And they inspire me every single day to keep going. They're amazing.
And I think that's the mindset. When we were at Special Operations Command, and we had wounded that were there. I had at one point I had 19. Our group had 19 amputees that were deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq. So many that I had to put a prosthetics lab in theater just to make sure that their prosthetics were taken care of.
There.
Yeah. Well, because they were the alternative was when they break a prosthetic, they'd have to go back to Ramstein, take them 2 weeks out of the fight, and then they have to get back. And the commanders were complaining, and it was like, all right, let's figure this out. But my point is that I've never been somebody who said we have to get to a point where you're functional. You have to get to a point where you're operational, where you're optimized. How can you? Functional by the government standard is low. You're going to live a good life, and you're going to be able to do your activities of daily living. Well, what if I don't want to do that? Like you, what if you don't want to do that? I want to be up here. Mm-hmm. There's people that help you get up here. You might be able to get it by yourself, but I'll tell you what, if you have a team, you can get there. And that's my feeling. So my feeling is somebody gave a hoot to help me. Well, why wouldn't we help somebody else? Right?
What an incredible place to finish this up. Jim, thank you so much, for everything you do. And for anyone listening, please go to IWP. You can donate, even if Jim might not ask you to. Go donate, because it helps so many different people. It really does. Jim, what a great pleasure to talk to you today. And thank you.
You bet. Thanks. It's good to meet you.
You too. You're listening to Searching for Heroes with Benjamin Hall. We'll be right back. Well, great pleasure speaking to Jim right there. And, it's always interesting speaking to someone who has sort of dealt with some of the same places and groups that I've dealt with as well. And to hear from his side what his experiences are when I know them from my side. But I think it's very clear about the VA and the good it can do, but it's about persuading people. What was it? 8 million veterans who do not use the VA. That's a staggering number when there's such an incredible network for them to access if they do it. So I'm amazed at that number. I was also very interested in what he said at the beginning, and that, veterans are often, so many people seem to think that veterans might have PTSD, that they may not hire them as a result. And that's new to me. I thought it was the opposite. I mean, if someone was walking in and I had a job, I would give it to a veteran, give it to someone who had served over someone who had not. So I'm sad to hear that it can be the opposite, that people are being looked down upon because they have served. That's sad. And also really interesting, it's the first time I've heard him talk about how you go out and look for people who may be at risk for suicide. looking at the areas where the numbers are high, looking at their backgrounds, try and figure out and then go in and help them. Because he's right. If you just throw the net out wide, when everyone has a different reason perhaps to take their own lives, it might be really hard to find them. But if you can identify where they might be and look specifically state to state, even city to city, you can perhaps go in and help person by person. And Jim is one of those people who will go and clearly help every single person who he can. And look, this podcast is called Searching for Heroes. It's people who go out and do amazing things. And it just seems that he's one of them. He's someone who wants to keep helping. And he's someone who wants to keep trying to save lives. And I have nothing but total respect for him for doing that. So look, everyone, if you have a chance, reach out to anyone you know who might need help, or reach out to the American Warrior Partnership. That's something that Jim is a president and CEO of, which clearly does a lot of great work. So thank you, everyone, for joining me again this week. And, well, I look forward to next week. Bye. Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcasts Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts. And Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.